Albion soon attacked, and a goal looked possible. Springett saved. Again, West Brom came storming on, and former Queen's Park player Clive Clark scored against his old teammates.
He stood where champions stood, wore the same colours, guarded the same goal. But the cheers were never for him. Not really, they were for the name. And the name wasn't his alone. Ron Springett, the brother who wore the England badge. The brother the newspapers followed. The brother history chose to remember. Peter? He played for years, held his line, did his job. But to most, he was just the other one. The one who arrived after the cameras turned. The one who kept his head down while the spotlight turned away. Even his transfer wasn't clean. They didn't just sign him. They swapped him for his own brother. One Springett in, one Springett out. He wasn't forgotten because he failed. He was forgotten because someone else was louder. And in this game, loud wins. If you remember the ones they left off the back pages, the ones who never begged for attention, but deserved more than silence, subscribe. Because here, the forgotten finally get a name that stands. Peter John Springett was born on 8 May 1946 in Fulham, West London. Not into headlines, not into history, just into a home where football spoke louder than words ever did. He wasn't raised to chase attention. He was raised to protect a goal. The first jersey he wore didn't carry glory. It carried the quiet burden of a name already taken. Because by the time Peter picked up the gloves, his older brother Ron was already making England's bench. Ron had the badge, Ron had the headlines, Ron had the myth. Peter had the same last name, and no space to stand in it. But he didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't explain, he just got better. He joined Queen's Park Rangers as a teenager, slipped into the youth system, and moved like water, filling every space left open without a ripple. He never asked for praise, never asked for comparison. But football doesn't care what you ask for. It only remembers who it sees first. And Peter was always the second name, even when he earned his first start, even when he earned the gloves, even when the club began to rise. The headline still said, Ron Springett's brother. And Peter said nothing. He just stood in the goal, waited for the shot, and braced for a career that would never let him be the only Springett on the page. It was supposed to be the moment, the one that rewrites how a name sounds, the one that carves you into memory. In 1967, Queen's Park Rangers were chasing something impossible, a third division side trying to win a major cup. They didn't belong at Wembley. They weren't meant to lift anything. But someone forgot to tell Peter Springett. All season he was the calm in the fire, unshaken, unpraised, unbeaten when it mattered. QPR surged through the rounds. And on 4th March 1967 they stood at Wembley. Underdogs in every sense, facing West Bromwich Albion, a first division side, built for finals. By half-time they were 2 goals down, broken, done. But then something shifted. QPR clawed one back, then another, then a third. And behind every desperate clearance, behind every flicker of belief, stood Peter. The last wall no one had mentioned in the programme. They won 3-2, and QPR became the first third division team in history to win the League Cup. It should have changed everything. He was the man between the posts in one of the most romantic victories English football had seen. He didn't just play in it, he held it together. But by the time the papers came out the next morning, the names they remembered were the ones who scored, the ones who ran forward, the ones whose brothers weren't already famous. Peter Springett walked off Wembley's grass that day with a medal, a win, and silence. Because even after making history, he still hadn't escaped his brother's name. Then came the moment that no player expects, and no brother forgets. May 1967. Just months after QPR's miracle at Wembley, Peter Springett was told to pack his kit. He was leaving, but not just leaving. Swapped. Queen's Park Rangers were bringing back a name they knew. Ron Springett, the England keeper, the older brother, the headline Springett. And in exchange, they sent Peter to Sheffield Wednesday. Straight swap. Brother for brother. Springett for Springett. Blood for blood. There's no other story like it. 2 goalkeepers. Same name, same family. One in, one out. The deal was done like it was just business. But for Peter, it wasn't just a transfer. It was a message. You did everything right. You helped us win. But we still want the other one. How do you argue with that? He went quietly. Of course he did. Because that's who he was. No interviews. No bitterness. just packed his bag and walked into a new city, carrying the name that had just been traded away. It was more than a move, it was a legacy reset, and Peter Springett had just been written into the wrong chapter. He arrived in Sheffield not as a signing, but as an exchange. A name they didn't ask for but now belonged to. Sheffield Wednesday, once proud, now slipping. A club still wearing its old suit, even as the seams began to tear. Peter didn't show up to fix anything. He just showed up to hold the line. And for years that's exactly what he did. While others blamed the board or pointed fingers in the dressing room, he stood in the goal, hands ready, face calm, never asking for sympathy. He wasn't spectacular. He was dependable, game after game, season after season. He made more than 180 league appearances for the club, through rotation, relegation, and a city that stopped expecting miracles. The headlines moved on, the fans stopped hoping. But Peter didn't walk away, because he wasn't chasing legacy. He was guarding a job like it was his last duty. Some men want to be remembered, others want to be counted on. And when Sheffield Wednesday began to break apart, Peter Springett didn't chase the lifeboat. He stayed in the flood and held the door open for everyone else. When most players drift down the leagues, they fade. Peter didn't fade. He held. In 1975, he left Sheffield Wednesday and moved to Barnsley. No parades, no interviews, just a new dressing room and another net to guard. He wasn't there to reinvent himself. He was there to work. He gave them 5 full seasons, nearly 200 league appearances. No drama, no decline, just presence. Because for Peter, every club, every pitch, every match was the same job. Keep it out, keep going, keep quiet. From Barnsley he moved to Scarborough, then Frickley Athletic, lower leagues, less money. But he didn't complain. He still trained, still showed up, still gave everything to a game that had never quite given everything back. There were no contract demands, no swan song speeches, no farewell tours, just gloves, mud, and the silence of a man doing a job the right way until the end. Peter didn't play for legacy. He played because he still could. And that made him rare. He was never first in line. Not for headlines, not for England, not even for memory. But when the real game started, when it rained, when it mattered, they called his name. Peter Springett wasn't forgotten because he lacked talent. He was forgotten because of 4 things football rarely admits. First, he had the wrong brother. Ron Springett wore the England badge. Peter wore the expectation that came with it. Second, he played during a golden age of goalkeepers. Banks, Shilton, Clements. Too many legends. Not enough gloves to go around. Third, he spent most of his best years in clubs that didn't have the microphone. QPR, Sheffield Wednesday, Barnsley. Teams where excellence was seen but not broadcast. And fourth, he was quiet. Too quiet. No scandals, no quotes, no wars with managers or the press. And in football, if you don't make noise, they pretend you were never there. He didn't ask to be remembered, but he earned it. And that's what makes this worse. He did everything right, stayed professional, stayed loyal, stayed present. And they still left his name out of the ending. After the boots were hung up, there were no cameras waiting, no tributes, no farewell interviews. Peter Springett walked away from football and into a life without applause. He joined the police, worked quietly in South Yorkshire. And when Aston Villa's stolen European Cup was anonymously returned in 1982, it was Peter, now in uniform, who received it at West Bar Police Station. That's the kind of man he was, never chasing headlines, only answering when duty called. But as the years passed, his body began to lose the battle his hands had won for decades. The illness came slow, a 4-year fight, and then the chair. A quiet confinement, no announcements, just days that grew harder, and a voice the game had already stopped listening to. Peter Springett died in August 1997, still young, still unheard, still carrying a career that never asked for anything but the chance to prove itself. He didn't fade in scandal. He didn't fall in disgrace, he just disappeared. Exactly the way he played, without complaint, without noise. And when he left, the silence that followed wasn't out of respect. It was just silence. Because they had already moved on. He played through the noise, without ever adding to it. 500 matches, 1 Wembley triumph, A career built on loyalty, not image. He was traded for his brother, then outlived the shadow. He was passed between clubs, but never dropped the standard. He never wore the England shirt, but he wore responsibility, wore silence, wore pressure, and never once asked to be thanked for it. When the illness came, he stayed silent. When the crowds moved on, he stayed loyal. And when the game forgot his name, he never tried to remind it. That's what makes his story matter. Because Peter Springett didn't chase memory, he protected it. Every time he stood in front of a goal, he was guarding a history that would never write itself without men like him. Football doesn't like men like him. Too honest, too quiet, too consistent to be exciting, too calm to be sold. But that doesn't make them small, it makes them necessary. And today, we say the name they never said loud enough. Peter Springett. Not just someone's brother, not just a name on a swap deal, but a man who kept the goal while history looked the other way. Now it's time to look back. Subscribe. Because this is where the forgotten get remembered, and this is where the quiet finally gets heard.